Welcome to F124 Open Lobbies, the home of clean racing, F1 esports level drivers, and absolute lunatics in the wild.
What the hell?
However, I have a problem. On the entirety of my massive catalogue of videos on this channel, I have never won a race in an open lobby. So in this video, we're going to find out how long it takes for a completely inexperienced F1 game noob to win his first ever online race. Is this actually possible? Well, as you're about to find out, just surviving one of these races alone deserves a trophy. Okay, so somewhere on the screen there should be a timer, and this was the first race in this challenge, and we're at Spa-Francorchamps. So even though we are starting a long way back from pole, it's a very long lap, so I've still got a chance of a win. And to be fair, I had a pretty decent start until this happened. And well, yeah, the carnage didn't exactly stop there. But after 45 minutes of just absolute chaos, I was lining up in a very good grid spot of second place at the Hungaro Ring, and I thought that this was going to be an opportunity to complete the challenge. So to be honest, I had a pretty average start. I stayed in my position, and after this I was slowly losing ground to the driver ahead, and because of this we're quickly going to speed up to halfway through the second lap. It's now time for the crucial chicane in the second sector of this track, and I was losing touch to first place, so I knew that I had to take a massive risk going through these two corners. And well, unfortunately for me, my risk didn't exactly pay off. And not too long after this, I had another opportunity to win a race in Abu Dhabi this time. I was 6 tenths back from second place on the final lap with another DRS straight to go, and once again I thought that this was going to be the race to complete the challenge. However, leaving turn 7, I turned on the overtake button extremely early to try and get even more straight line speed, and I just had a massive wobble, which meant that sadly I would not win this race. And to make matters worse, with just 3 corners to go on this entire race, I spun, which meant that in the end I finished this race in 3rd. But to be honest, although I was very disappointed with this, I was slowly making progress, and I was getting used to multiplayer, because genuinely this was my first ever time playing multiplayer on F124. It is now time for my very next race in this challenge. We're at the Chinese Grand Prix track, and I'm starting all the way down in P17, and I did not know that this was about to be an absolutely crazy race. So as the race is about to start, honestly I was quite confident that this would not be the one to complete the challenge, but it would be carnage, so at least that would be useful for the montage that you saw earlier in the video. Anyway, as the lights go out, I instantly made up 4 places, which was fantastic, but to be expected, because in these races people are usually offline. So first up is the very long winding section of corners, and this was basically a war zone. I've got no idea what the Ferrari was doing on the left, and also on the left was a Mercedes doing a Lando Norris, which for me was 2 free overtakes. After this I went through a ghosted Ferrari, and then I got up the inside of Williams, which I was absolutely delighted with because I was already into 9th place. However, as you probably would expect, I was still thinking that there was 0 chance that I would end up winning this race. And if we just stop the footage here, you'll see the reason why. Even though I've somehow made up an extra 2 places going through the first corner of the second sector, I'd been hit on the side of the car, and this had given me pretty massive side pod damage. And this was just so frustrating because this race had started so well, but there is nothing that I can do about that, and we'll just move on from it. The next group of cars ahead of me is an Alpine, McLaren and Aston Martin. Going through the long left-hander, I got past the McLaren straight away. I'm going to assume that they had damage, and then got past the Aston Martin around the outside of the long right-hander, and then this happened. Honestly, I just absolutely loved filming this video because I literally burst out laughing when this happened. Anyway, after this sequence of corners, I was already up into 4th place, and this was only after 1.5 sectors. This meant that I'd already gained 13 places, which was absolutely brilliant, and to be totally honest with you lot, I was definitely starting to dream of a potential win. However, that would not be any time soon, because as you can see in the background, I spent the next entire lap catching up to 3rd place and closing down a 2-second gap. And I knew that getting into the DRS of the 3 cars ahead of me was just so crucial, especially with the time that I was losing through the big aerodynamic corners with my side pod damage. Anyway, as we return to normal racing speed, as you can see by the end of the second sector, I've closed the gap to 3rd place. Unfortunately for me, I've tried to store as much ERS as possible for the opportunity to make an overtake, and fast. And I knew that I needed to get a move on because of how short these races are. So leaving turn 13, I got a pretty decent exit. I knew that the car ahead of me was also going to have DRS, so I turned on the overtake button as soon as I felt possible, and this helped me out so much because I was able to gain straight line speed on him. And luckily for me, as I got closer to the car ahead, the slipstream effect only became more powerful, and this brought me alongside him going into the braking zone. I knew that I had to be so committed going into this corner, which would be difficult considering the damage that I did have. However, I did make the overtake happen, but this was was only half of the good news that would come out of this corner. Going into turn 14, the Haas in front of me absolutely flew into the Sauber, which was a free position into second place, and this was so good. However, I was worried about the Haas's safety, but that just meant in the future I would have to be a little bit more cautious, and now we're coming into the long winding section of corners, which I didn't really think was an overtaking opportunity, but it turned out that it was. The Haas driver just ran so wide under braking, which opened a gap for me up the inside, and I managed to get past him, and now I was into first place. It's now time for the first left-hander on the track, and the same Haas just hit me in the rear and then completely messed up my exit, and then he hit me again and then again, which eventually gave me even worse side pod damage. And honestly, I was just so frustrated, so going into turn 6, I decided to stay behind him all the way to the really long back straight. Thankfully, I stayed within DRS of the Haas, and I absolutely dumped my entire battery on getting past him because I was genuinely so fed up of waiting. Unsurprisingly, he did try and scare me off the track, which almost worked, and going into the braking zone, I just covered off the entire track just in case by staying in the middle of the road. However, in the braking zone, he decided to dive up around the outside of me, which at first I thought was odd, but he attached his front wheel to the back of my car and gave me even more side pod damage. Next up was the final corner, and as you can see, he sent it out my inside from a mile back, and I didn't even see until I looked behind me, but thankfully I completely cut him off, and even more thankfully I put him back into third place. So hopefully for the rest of this race I won't be seeing him. The driver behind me now was driving a Sauber, and possibly because of my damage or possibly because I'm useless at this game, he was definitely faster than me, and looking back, the decision that I'm about to make was so stupid. So we're coming up to the DRS detection point for this straight, and I decided to pull over and let the Sauber through, which gave me DRS for the back straight, and then the same happened for the main straight onto the final lap of this race. And if I wanted any chance of winning this race and therefore completing the challenge, I had to stay within DRS. So as I mentioned, I stayed within DRS on the main straight, which brought me to just behind first place, and it's now time for the final lap. This was crunch time. Going into the first section of corners, I instantly noticed that he ran wide again going through the braking zone, and I actually tried to go up the inside of him straight away. However, early on in this move, I realised that this wasn't going to work out, and I planned on backing out until he had a massive snap of understeer. This brought his car away from the apex of the corner, so I chose to go up the inside of him. I gave him space, and I was back in the lead of the race, which to be honest was not entirely ideal. And now for the next half a lap, you're about to see a disastrous attempt at trying to let this guy through so I could get DRS along the back straight. Going into turn 6, I magically ran wide on the exit. Sadly, the driver behind me didn't get past me. Honestly, watching this back is hilarious because I'm driving like a total idiot. Next up is turn 7, and going through there I did nothing out of the ordinary, but I turned in extremely late for turn 8, which brought him right onto the back of me, and then for turn 9 I didn't even bother and I just let the state car through. Thank God that's over because now it's time to focus on actually driving. It is now time for arguably the 3 most important corners of this entire challenge, as I had to nail these if I wanted to complete the video in this race. First up was turn 11. I broke a little bit later than Nirvana 249, and he had a horrible run on the exit of this corner, which luckily for me set him up for a potentially horrible run onto the straight. And once again, luckily for me, he had an absolute nightmare as he ran along the gravel for a second on the exit, and now we were side by side coming onto this straight. I had 100% ERS and therefore a massive straight line speed advantage, and I knew that this was where I would win this race. First up was a heavy braking 90-degree right-hander, and thankfully I had absolutely no problems there. There was just one corner to go. All I had to do was not get a penalty and I would win this race. I had done it. After 1 hour, 42 minutes and 38 seconds of chaos, crashes and carnage, I had won my first ever online race on F124. And if you did want proof of this, here is the PlayStation trophy that you actually get for completing this challenge. Thank you all so much for watching, please subscribe, and if you have any multiplayer challenge video ideas, please put them in the comments below.